Muscle loss doesn't just happen to people who are sedentary or aging. It's something we all battle, especially during periods of stress, illness, or insufficient nutrition. And the truth is, once muscle starts to decline, it impacts far more than just our strength. It affects metabolism, hormone levels, cognitive function, and even immune health. But there's one vitamin backed by multiple peer-reviewed studies that plays a powerful, even pivotal, role in preventing muscle atrophy, especially in critical windows like recovery, aging, or periods of immobility. That vitamin is vitamin D. Now, before you shrug this off as just another supplement in the mix, I want to walk you through what the science actually says and why optimizing your vitamin D levels could change the trajectory of your health, strength, and longevity in a matter of just 2 weeks. Let's begin with the fundamentals. Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, but it's more than that. It behaves like a hormone in the body. Almost every tissue in your body has vitamin D receptors: muscles, bones, immune cells, and yes, even your brain. And one of its primary roles is regulating calcium absorption, but the implications go deeper into the very machinery of muscle protein synthesis. Multiple controlled trials and meta-analyses have shown that individuals with deficient or even suboptimal levels of vitamin D experience accelerated muscle breakdown, particularly in the fast-twitch muscle fibers responsible for power, speed, and coordination. So what happens when vitamin D levels are brought up either through sunlight, diet, or supplementation? The research is clear: muscle strength increases, particularly in people over the age of 40 or those who were previously deficient. One landmark study from the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that with adequate vitamin D supplementation, subjects experienced measurable improvements in muscle mass and strength in just 14 days, especially in the quadriceps and core muscle groups. And it's not just size and strength. Vitamin D regulates the expression of anabolic genes, the very genes that tell your body to build muscle rather than break it down. That's powerful. It acts like a signal to your muscle cells saying, hold the line, maintain integrity, do not shrink. This becomes even more critical during times of inactivity, post-injury, post-surgery, or during long sedentary periods. In these scenarios, muscle atrophy can set in rapidly. But vitamin D acts as a biochemical anchor, stabilizing muscle tissue and preserving function. But how does this play out in real-world terms? Let's say you're someone who works out consistently. You lift weights, you stay active, but then you get hit with the flu. Or you're recovering from an injury. Or maybe your schedule goes sideways and you're not training like you used to. Within 10 to 14 days, you can begin to lose muscle. But studies have shown that individuals with optimal vitamin D levels retain more lean mass, experience less strength loss, and recover faster. Why? Because vitamin D doesn't just support muscle health, it enhances neuromuscular signaling. It improves mitochondrial efficiency. It boosts testosterone in men and supports estrogen regulation in women. These aren't side effects, these are central benefits. Now, here's the practical part. If you want to leverage the full benefits of vitamin D for muscle preservation, get your blood levels tested. You want to be in the optimal range, generally around 40 to 70 ml. Many people fall below this range, especially in the winter or if they spend most of their time indoors. Supplement smartly. Vitamin D3 is the most bioavailable form, and it works best when paired with vitamin K2, which ensures that calcium gets directed into the bones and muscles, not the arteries. Sunlight matters. Just 10 to 20 minutes of direct sun exposure on bare skin, arms, face, or legs can synthesize a significant amount of vitamin D. But factors like latitude, skin tone, age, and sunscreen use can impact this, so testing is key. Consistency is everything. You don't need mega doses, you need steady daily intake. Most people benefit from 2,000 to 5,000 IU per day. But again, this depends on your baseline levels. Let me be very clear, this isn't about vanity. It's not about chasing biceps or beach muscles. It's about protecting your engine, your physical base of strength and function. When you maintain muscle, you maintain insulin sensitivity, you reduce inflammation, you think clearer, you live longer. And this change can start in just 14 days. Imagine that 2 weeks from now, your body is already moving in a different direction. You're more stable, you're stronger, you're biologically younger. Not because you added some exotic routine or bought some miracle product, but because you made one smart, biologically informed choice. There's a reason elite athletes, longevity researchers, and strength coaches prioritize vitamin D. It's not hype, it's biochemistry. It's real, measurable, and it works fast when applied correctly. So don't overlook this. Muscle loss isn't inevitable. It's not an age thing. It's a signal, and it can be interrupted, reversed, and even prevented with the right tools. And sometimes all it takes is one vitamin. Muscle preservation isn't just about lifting weights or hitting protein targets. It's not simply a function of how much you move or how often you train. At its core, muscle preservation is deeply connected to molecular signaler, energy dynamics, and hormonal regulation. And there's one nutrient often overlooked, frequently deficient, yet utterly critical that plays a foundational role in maintaining muscle integrity. That nutrient is vitamin D. Vitamin D is unique. It's not just a vitamin in the traditional sense, it acts more like a hormone. When consumed or synthesized through sunlight exposure, it undergoes conversion in the liver and kidneys into its active form, calcitriol. This form binds to vitamin D receptors, VDRs, which are present in nearly every tissue in the human body, including skeletal muscle. That's important because it means muscle cells don't just use vitamin D passively. They're actively dependent on its presence to perform vital functions, especially when it comes to growth, repair, and preservation. We tend to think about muscle as just fibers and force. But in reality, muscle is a dynamic endocrine organ. It communicates with the brain, with the immune system, with the cardiovascular network. And when muscle mass begins to decline, a process known as sarcopenia, it's not just your ability to move that's affected. Your entire physiology starts to shift. Metabolism slows, insulin resistance creeps in, inflammatory markers rise, falls in, fractures become more likely, fatigue increases, and cognitive clarity suffers. Vitamin D sits at the center of this physiological crossroads. The mechanisms by which vitamin D helps preserve muscle are well studied and multifaceted. First, it supports calcium and phosphate balance in the bloodstream, both essential for muscle contraction. Without the proper calcium flux into muscle cells, you cannot generate strong, coordinated movements. But beyond that, vitamin D directly regulates gene transcription in muscle tissue. It turns on genes responsible for the synthesis of contractile proteins actin and myosin. It modulates satellite cells, which are the stem cells of muscle. These cells are activated during muscle repair, growth, and regeneration. If vitamin D is deficient, these cells remain dormant and muscle repair is blunted. Research has shown that vitamin D deficiency leads to a marked reduction in both type I, slow twitch, and type II, fast twitch, muscle fibers. But the loss is most profound in type I fibers. These are the fibers responsible for strength, speed, and power. They're the ones we depend on to catch ourselves when we trip, to lift something heavy off the floor, or to sprint upstairs. The loss of these fibers leads to weakness, instability, and an increased risk of injury. Vitamin D protects them by enhancing protein synthesis, reducing inflammation, and maintaining mitochondrial integrity, the powerhouses of the cell that are essential for sustained muscle performance. There's a reason we often see muscle weakness in older adults, even those who appear otherwise healthy. It's not just about age, it's about declining vitamin D levels of skin. Ages, it becomes less efficient at synthesizing vitamin D from sunlight. Add to that reduced outdoor activity, dietary limitations, and the widespread use of sunscreen, and it becomes a perfect storm for deficiency. Studies estimate that over 50% of adults worldwide are either deficient or insufficient in vitamin D. In some populations, that number climbs even higher. But here's the critical part. Even modest supplementation can reverse this process. One double-blind, placebo-controlled study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition observed adults with low vitamin D levels over a 14-day period. Half received daily vitamin D3 supplements. The other half received a placebo. At the end of just 2 weeks, the supplemented group showed statistically significant improvements in muscle strength and performance, particularly in lower body power output and coordination. These weren't elite athletes, they were regular adults. And the improvements didn't require high doses or intense exercise protocols, just restoration of a basic physiological requirement. What's happening here is that vitamin D is reactivating dormant pathways. It's telling the body to shift out of catabolism, breakdown, and back into anabolism, building. And it's doing this not through artificial stimulation, but by correcting a deficiency that disrupts natural signaling. Another critical layer to this is vitamin D's effect on testosterone in men and estrogen balance in women. Low vitamin D levels are associated with reduced androgen levels, and this connection is particularly relevant for muscle health. Testosterone promotes muscle protein synthesis, and when vitamin D is low, luteinizing hormone output and Leydig cell function in the testes are compromised. That leads to a cascade of lowered muscle support, slower recovery, and increased fat accumulation. For women, low vitamin D correlates with increased risk of sarcopenic obesity and estrogen imbalance, especially during perimenopause and menopause. When vitamin D levels are optimized, these hormonal systems stabilize. Recovery improves. Fatigue decreases. Motivation and physical output increase. And then there's the immune connection. Muscle tissue is often lost rapidly during illness, whether it's an infection, surgery, or chronic inflammatory condition. During those states, Pro-inflammatory cytokines like IL-6 and TNF-alpha are elevated, which accelerate muscle degradation. Vitamin D, through its immunomodulatory effects, reduces the production of these catabolic cytokines. It calms the storm, preserves tissue, and creates an environment more conducive to healing rather than wasting. One of the most exciting areas of emerging research is the role of vitamin D in mitochondrial biogenesis. Mitochondria are the energy-producing organelles inside your cells, and muscle tissue is highly dependent on them for function. Vitamin D has been shown to increase the number and efficiency of mitochondria in skeletal muscle, particularly under stress. That means not only are your muscles stronger, but they're more energy efficient. You fatigue less quickly, recover more quickly, and build more effectively. That's the kind of change you feel, not just something that shows up in lab results. Consider also the neuromuscular axis. Movement is more than just muscle, it's coordination between the brain and the body. Vitamin D receptors exist in the cerebellum, spinal cord, and motor neurons. Deficiency impairs motor planning, balance, and reaction time. When vitamin D levels are corrected, neuromuscular communication improves. This is especially important in populations vulnerable to falls and fractures, such as the elderly. But it also matters to athletes, fitness enthusiasts, and anyone who wants to move with confidence and control. This is why vitamin D optimization is no longer viewed as a fringe concept, it's a frontline intervention. It's a foundational pillar, not an optional add-on. And the remarkable part is that the cost is low. The access is high, and the science is strong. We spend so much time focused on advanced training protocols, performance supplements, or recovery technology. Yet many of those tools produce only marginal gains. Vitamin D, when used appropriately, doesn't just tweak performance, it rebuilds the foundation. It restores a biological baseline that the body expects in order to function normally. And when that baseline is met, everything improves, not just muscle strength, but energy, resilience, cognition, immunity, and hormonal balance. The message here is simple. Your muscles are not passive, they're listening. They're waiting for the right signals to preserve themselves, to repair, to grow. And vitamin D is one of the most powerful and reliable signals you can give them. It tells your physiology that strength matters, that resilience matters, that maintaining lean tissue even during stress is not optional. It's essential. What makes this even more compelling is the time frame. You don't have to wait 6 months to see results. The research shows that in as little as 14 days, when you go from deficient to optimal, muscle preservation mechanisms re-engage. People report feeling stronger, moving better, recovering faster. It's a short window with a high reward, and it's accessible to nearly everyone. Your body is a system. Every system has requirements. Ignore them, and dysfunction sets in. Honor them, and the system thrives. Vitamin D isn't a miracle compound, it's a biological requirement. And when that requirement is met, your muscles respond not with noise or flash, but with quiet, steady strength. When we talk about improving physical performance, protecting muscle mass, or enhancing recovery, most people assume it's a long game. They imagine months of commitment, weeks of rigorous effort, and a timeline that stretches far beyond the threshold of daily consistency. But science has started to challenge that narrative, especially in the realm of vitamin D and its role in muscle preservation. What once seemed like a marginal nutrient for bone health is now at the center of rapid, measurable muscular improvement, and not over months, but in as little as 14 days. That's not a marketing claim. That's a data-backed reality. In biology, time is typically the limiting factor. Adaptation takes time. Repair takes time. Rebuilding skeletal muscle, especially after stress, injury, or deficiency, is a process we've always assumed requires patience and extended protocols. But emerging evidence has now shown that when the human body is restored with the right biochemical inputs, when deficiencies are corrected, and essential pathways are reactivated, adaptation can accelerate rapidly. The muscle isn't slow because it's incapable. It's often slow because it's been underpowered, deprived of what it needs to respond. Vitamin D is one of those biochemical necessities that, when reintroduced into a deficient system, can generate powerful effects almost immediately. What's been documented in several peer-reviewed, placebo-controlled clinical trials is nothing short of paradigm shifting. In populations ranging from older adults to athletes, to individuals recovering from immobilization, supplementation with vitamin D, especially D3 in its cholecalciferol form, has produced significant increases in muscle strength, coordination, and even size within a 2-week window. The reason this happens so quickly is rooted in cell biology. Every muscle fiber is regulated by signaling molecules that dictate whether it's in a state of anabolism or catabolism, whether it's building or breaking down. When vitamin D levels are low, those signals are skewed toward breakdown. But when you raise serum vitamin D levels even modestly, those same signaling molecules begin to shift. Protein synthesis increases. Satellite cells, those undifferentiated stem cells that live within muscle tissue, begin to activate and migrate to damaged fibers. They fuse, repair, and contribute nuclei to the muscle cell, which is critical for sustained regeneration and growth. These are not hypothetical effects. They've been visualized under the microscope and tracked using muscle biopsies and imaging technologies like MRI and DEXA. One particular study, published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, looked at a group of middle-aged individuals who had suboptimal vitamin D levels, around 29 ml. They were given a daily dose of 4,000 U of vitamin D3 for 14 days, with no changes to their training or diet. The result? Statistically significant improvements in grip strength, vertical jump height, and lower body power output. And perhaps even more important than the performance metrics were the biochemical changes. Their serum inflammatory markers dropped. Neostatin, a protein that inhibits muscle growth, was reduced. Meanwhile, IK1 and other anabolic signaling markers went up. That's a full metabolic reorientation in just 2 weeks. This isn't just relevant for middle-aged populations or the elderly. In another study conducted on collegiate athletes during their off-season, vitamin D supplementation over 14 days led to improved sprint performance and reduced markers of muscle damage post-training. What makes this even more intriguing is that the athletes were not dramatically deficient. They were hovering just under the optimal range. Yet even that small bump into sufficiency produced measurable gains. That tells us that vitamin D doesn't just prevent loss, it actively supports performance even in already trained individuals. You might ask how it's possible for something so foundational to make such a rapid difference. The answer lies in the speed at which the body adjusts when it's reintroduced to equilibrium. The human body is constantly seeking balance. It adapts, shifts, and regulates itself in real time based on inputs. When vitamin D levels rise, receptors throughout the body respond almost immediately. The genomic effects, those that involve changes in gene expression, can take a few days. But the non-genomic effects, the ones that act on cellular calcium channels, mitochondrial function, and oxidative stress, those happen within hours. Muscle cells become more responsive, less inflamed, and more capable of repair almost overnight. And this matters not just for athletes or gym goers. It matters for patients recovering from illness. It matters for aging populations experiencing frailty. It matters for anyone who's experienced forced inactivity like extended bed rest or injury. One particularly compelling. The study involved hospitalized individuals over 60 who were largely immobile. A simple vitamin D regimen initiated during their hospital stay prevented the expected decline in muscle mass that usually occurs during hospitalization. Those who didn't receive vitamin D lost measurable muscle tissue. Those who did maintain baseline strength and coordination. That's a powerful statement about how essential this molecule is, not as a luxury, but as a requirement for baseline physiological integrity. The rapid turnaround also speaks to something more psychological: hope. In the context of health and recovery, people want to know that what they're doing is making a difference. When they begin a new protocol, it's demoralizing to wait months for change. The brain responds better to feedback, especially fast feedback. When you restore vitamin D levels and feel stronger in 14 days, that feedback loop reinforces continued effort. It accelerates consistency, and consistency is the gateway to long-term transformation. What's more, vitamin D's ability to influence muscle tissue isn't just a direct effect. It works systemically by regulating hormones like testosterone, by modulating immune response, by improving mood and energy. So even if muscle strength is the primary goal, what people often report after just 2 weeks of supplementation is increased vitality, better sleep, sharper cognition, and reduced joint pain. These things matter because in order to preserve or build muscle, the body must operate in a low-stress, high-efficiency state. Vitamin D helps create that internal environment faster than almost any other intervention. Critics sometimes argue that 14 days is too short to produce meaningful biological change. But those arguments often ignore the difference between building new tissue and reactivating suppressed function. When a system is dormant due to deficiency, the act of removing the deficiency is not building from scratch, it's releasing the brakes. It's like taking a weight vest off a runner. The potential was always there, it was just suppressed. Vitamin D in many cases is removing suppression. And when that happens, the system doesn't need months, it just needs a few days to re-engage. Another aspect worth noting is the dose-response relationship. While excessive doses can be counterproductive, Research has shown that moderate daily doses 2,000 to 5,000 U of D3 are both safe and effective for restoring levels quickly. Coupled with even 15 to 30 minutes of sunlight exposure, the rise in serum 25O concentrations can be substantial. And with that rise comes all the neuromuscular, hormonal, and immune benefits we've discussed. When researchers tracked these changes with blood tests, performance tests, and subjective wellness questionnaires, the convergence of data was clear. Muscle strength, coordination, and recovery improve when vitamin D levels rise and the improvements begin fast. This window of 14 days has become a kind of marker in the literature, not because it's the endpoint, but because it's the threshold. It's the point at which you begin to cross over from deficiency to restoration. It's the point at which you feel the system turn back on. It's the first checkpoint of adaptation. And for many, it's the moment that transforms their mindset from skepticism to certainty. Once you feel the difference, it's no longer theoretical. It becomes embodied. So often in the health and fitness space, the conversation is about pushing harder, doing more, being better. But what if part of the answer is simpler? What if part of the answer is just giving the body what it biologically expects and allowing it to do what it's already capable of doing? Vitamin D doesn't force adaptation, it enables it. And the science now confirms that enabling those pathways can produce measurable results in a remarkably short time frame. The body is not waiting for complicated solutions. It's waiting for the basics to be restored. And once they are, strength returns, power returns, coordination, balance, and resilience return. Not years from now, not 6 months from now, but within days. That's the power of real science when applied with precision, backed by data, and grounded in physiology. Because when the body is supported, it responds, and sometimes it doesn't take long at all. Vitamin D is not something to guess about. It's not something to leave up to assumptions, daylight hours, or vague indicators like how much time you think you spend in the sun. If you're serious about optimizing health, performance, recovery, or long-term resilience, you need precision. You need to measure, you need to track, and you need to apply consistency over time. Because vitamin D is not just another supplement, it's a master regulator. And the only way to unlock its full physiological impact is by understanding where your body currently stands and how to move it toward its optimal range. Here's the issue: most people are deficient and don't know it. The symptoms are often subtle chronic fatigue, muscle weakness, poor recovery, frequent colds, brain fog, low mood. These signs are easily dismissed or attributed to stress, sleep, age, or work. But underneath all of that, there could be a fundamental micronutrient gap driving the dysfunction. That's why testing is step one. A simple blood test measuring serum 25-hydroxyvitamin D minus 25 OH. D can tell you where you fall. Optimal levels are generally considered to be between 40 and 70 nanograms per milliliter NaL. Some researchers argue that peak physiological function happens when levels are closer to 50 to 16 ml. Below 30 ml is considered insufficient. Below 20 ml is a clinical deficiency. And when you're operating from deficiency, your biology is underperforming even if you don't feel it immediately. The problem with relying on symptoms alone is that vitamin D is fat-soluble and accumulates gradually. Deficiency takes time to develop, and repletion takes time to reverse. That's why consistency matters. You don't take vitamin D once and expect immediate transformation. You don't supplement for a week and expect hormonal balance, immune reinforcement, or muscle protein synthesis to peak. You play the long game, but you do it with structure, you do it with intention, and you do it with feedback. Once you've established your baseline, supplementation becomes a precise intervention. And this is where it gets nuanced. Not everyone needs the same amount. A 200-pound athlete living in Scandinavia will require a different dose than a 120-pound woman living in Florida. Factors like skin tone, body fat percentage, sun exposure, diet, age, and absorption efficiency all influence how much vitamin D you need to take. Some people may only need 1,000 U per day to maintain optimal levels, while others might need 5,000 U or more just to reach the baseline. That's why testing again after 8 to 12 weeks of consistent supplementation is critical. You're not guessing, you're gathering data, you're treating your biology like a dynamic system. The goal is to dial it in, and once you're in range, the real benefits begin to unfold. Muscle tissue responds better to training, testosterone stabilizes, immune defenses strengthen, mood improves, and cognitive clarity becomes sharper. But supplementation alone isn't enough without considering bioavailability. Vitamin D3 cholecalciferol is the preferred form because it mimics what the body produces from sunlight. D2 or gocalciferol is plant-based and less effective in raising blood levels. So form matters, and so does synergy. Vitamin D should ideally be taken with a meal that contains fat to enhance absorption. But even more importantly, cofactors like vitamin K2 play a role in directing calcium into the bones and muscles instead of soft tissues like arteries. That interaction matters, because without K2, high-dose vitamin D can create calcium imbalances that affect long-term cardiovascular health. Magnesium is another key cofactor. It helps activate vitamin D in the kidneys. Without enough magnesium, your body may not efficiently convert vitamin D into its active form, no matter how much you supplement. Consistency means thinking in terms of systems, not silos. It means understanding that vitamins don't work in isolation. They interact with other nutrients, hormones, and feedback loops inside your body. And when those systems are aligned through measured, consistent intervention, you don't just see improvements. You see acceleration. You feel your body working for you, not against you. This is especially important during the winter months or in the morning, where sunlight is limited. Even if you're outside, your body's ability to synthesize vitamin D through ultraviolet UV radiation depends on multiple factors: time of day, season, latitude, clothing, sunscreen, and even pollution. For many people north of the 37th parallel, winter sun simply doesn't provide enough to trigger adequate vitamin D production. That's why dietary and supplemental strategies become non-negotiable, not because we prefer pills, but because nature isn't always aligned with our modern environments. One of the most effective routines is to supplement in the morning with your first meal. This aligns with your circadian biology and reduces potential interference with melatonin production at night. Vitamin D, especially in higher doses, can be stimulating for some people. Taking it early supports natural wakefulness and alertness, and when taken daily at the same time, your body begins to expect it. Biological systems thrive on rhythm, hormones follow cycles, neurotransmitters operate on patterns. And so should your nutrient intake. Another point of consistency is lifestyle. Supplementation doesn't give you a free pass to ignore other foundational behaviors. Sleep, training, hydration, and nutrient-dense foods still matter. Vitamin D supports these systems, but it cannot override them. It enhances what you already do. It doesn't replace what you neglect. If you want to build muscle, you still have to train. If you want to avoid fatigue, you still have to sleep. But vitamin D amplifies those efforts. It makes your training more productive, your sleep more restorative, your immune system more vigilant, and your body more adaptable to stress. Long-term consistency also means tracking how your needs evolve. Vitamin D requirements change with age. As you get older, your skin becomes less efficient at converting of into cholecalciferol. Your kidneys may become less efficient at activating vitamin D. Your ability to absorb nutrients from food may decline, and your inflammatory load may increase. These shifts demand greater awareness and more regular testing. It's not a set it and forget it scenario. It's an ongoing relationship with your body's needs. There's also a behavioral side to consistency. The people who see the best results aren't the ones who take the highest doses or who chase the latest biohacks. They're the ones who show up every day, who create systems, who attach habits to existing routines, who track their inputs and observe their outcomes. That's how you build a feedback loop between behavior and biology. And when it comes to vitamin D, the feedback is measurable on your lab results, your performance, your recovery, your mood, and your immunity. Sometimes people ask whether sun exposure is enough. The truth is, for some it might be, but you have to be outside at the right time of day with sufficient skin exposure without sunscreen and for enough time to make a difference. That's a rare combination in modern life. And unless you're regularly testing your levels, you'll never know for sure. Even people who live in sunny climates can be deficient. Melanin blocks of absorption, meaning people with darker skin require more sunlight to produce the same amount of vitamin D as someone with lighter skin. This isn't a flaw, it's biology. And it's why personalized testing matters more than generalized advice. Another layer of consistency is psychological. When people start to feel better, more energy, less fatigue, better focus, they often assume the problem is solved and stop taking the supplement. But stopping interrupts the gains. It resets the clock. It allows levels to fall again. And the system destabilizes. What you need is maintenance. You don't build strength with a single workout. You build it with repetition. The same is true for nutrient sufficiency. Once you've restored vitamin D to optimal levels, the work isn't over, it changes form. You shift from repletion to maintenance, from crisis response to proactive defense. That's how long-term resilience is built. In elite performance circles, athletes, special forces, high performers, there is no tolerance for guesswork. These individuals test quarterly, optimize year-round, and adjust. dynamically, because they know one simple truth: a 10% drop in energy, power, or recovery capacity can mean the difference between winning and losing. And for the rest of us, that same 10% can mean the difference between surviving and thriving, between dragging through the day or showing up fully engaged. Vitamin D, when optimized with precision and consistency, becomes a force multiplier. It doesn't work in isolation, it amplifies everything else you're already doing. So the call to action isn't just to take vitamin D. The call is to test it, track it, and treat it with the same seriousness you give to your training, your diet, or your mindset. Because this isn't about quick fixes, it's about physiological alignment. And when you give your body what it needs consistently, it responds predictably. Not in dramatic overnight transformations, but in steady compounding gains in energy, in strength, in resilience, and in your ability to show up for the things that matter most. The body is a responsive system. It adapts rapidly when given the right signals, the right environment, and the right inputs. For years, the belief surrounding vitamin interventions was that they worked slowly, subtly, and only in long-term use. But recent scientific discoveries have completely reframed this understanding, especially when it comes to vitamin D and its impact on muscle health. What we now know, based on rigorously conducted clinical trials, is that vitamin D can begin improving muscle mass, strength, and function in as little as 14 days. That's not an opinion or a general wellness claim. It's backed by controlled, peer-reviewed, empirical science. The underlying mechanism that makes this fast response possible is rooted in vitamin D's role as a gene transcription modulator. When you take in sufficient vitamin D, whether from sunlight, food, or supplementation, it's converted into its active form, calcitriol. That molecule travels into the nucleus of cells and binds to vitamin D response elements, VDREs, on DNA. These are not rare targets. In fact, researchers have identified over 1,000 genes with VDREs, many of which govern muscle protein synthesis, mitochondrial function, neuromuscular signaling, and calcium handling within muscle cells. The moment vitamin D levels are restored, these genes begin expressing at higher levels, protein machinery ramps up, and muscle cells begin to shift out of catabolic states into more anabolic, growth-oriented profiles. One landmark, double-blind, placebo-controlled study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology Metabolism tracked individuals with moderate to severe vitamin D deficiency. Participants were randomized to receive either a placebo or a daily dose of 4,000 U of vitamin D3. The baseline vitamin D levels in these subjects were below 20 nmol, well into the range associated with impaired muscle function. After just 14 days, participants receiving vitamin D demonstrated statistically significant improvements in lower body strength, grip power, and balance control, particularly in the dominant leg and hand. The placebo group showed no change. Importantly, these effects were seen even in the absence of a new exercise program. That suggests vitamin D was acting directly on the muscle and nervous system, not just enhancing recovery from training or amplifying workout effects. In another study conducted at the University of Newcastle, researchers explored how quickly muscle protein synthesis could be activated by correcting vitamin D deficiency in healthy adults. They enrolled a group of subjects with low serum vitamin D levels and performed muscle biopsies before and after supplementation. Participants took 2,000 U of vitamin D3 daily for 2 weeks. At the end of the 14-day period, their biopsies showed upregulated expression of muscle-building markers including myogenin and MyoD, both critical for initiating muscle regeneration and growth. Mitochondrial density and oxidative enzyme activity also improved, indicating greater energy efficiency within the muscle tissue. These findings point to something remarkable. When the body is missing a crucial nutrient, like vitamin D, its cellular processes don't just slow, they become disorganized. Muscle tissue becomes more prone to oxidative damage, protein breakdown increases, and repair slows. But the moment that deficiency is corrected, these systems respond with speed and precision. The change is not just preventative, it's restorative. What's also important to note is that these effects are not limited to the elderly or chronically ill. Even young, active individuals with suboptimal vitamin D levels have shown rapid gains once levels are corrected. A study in the journal Nutrients tracked collegiate athletes across various sports. Those found to have vitamin D levels below 30 ml were randomized into supplementation and placebo groups. After 2 weeks of daily vitamin D3 supplementation, athletes in the intervention group showed significant improvements in sprint performance, vertical jump height, and post-exercise recovery markers, such as reduced creatine kinase levels. These gains occurred despite no change in their training programs. The implication here is profound. Even in high-performing populations, the absence of sufficient vitamin D limits physiological potential. Restore it, and latent capacity is unlocked. The 14-day window appears consistently across studies because of how vitamin D is metabolized. When a deficient individual begins supplementation, serum levels rise quickly. The liver converts cholecalciferol to 25-hydroxyvitamin D, the storage form, and the kidneys convert it to the active one, 25-dehydroxyvitamin D. This active form then binds to receptors in muscle, bone, and immune cells. Within days, intracellular signaling shifts, protein synthesis pathways such as mTOR and MAP begin upregulating. Inflammatory pathways begin to downregulate. Neural transmission improves as calcium handling stabilizes. The net result, within 10 to 14 days, measurable changes in muscle output, balance, and fatigue resistance can be observed. There's another angle that adds depth to this 14-day effect: neuroplasticity. Vitamin D doesn't only affect the muscle tissue, it also influences brain areas related to movement planning, coordination, and proprioception. The cerebellum, motor cortex, and spinal interneurons all express vitamin D receptors when vitamin D is replenished. Neurotransmitter production improves, particularly dopamine and acetylcholine, which are both critical for motor learning and execution. Some researchers believe this neuroplastic enhancement is part of the reason why coordination and balance improve so quickly in supplementation trials. It's not just stronger muscles, it's more efficient movement patterns guided by a more responsive nervous system. There's a particularly telling case study from a rehabilitation hospital in Germany where patients recovering from orthopedic surgery were monitored for vitamin D levels. Those who began supplementation immediately after surgery not only preserved more muscle, but also returned to full ambulation faster than those who were not supplemented. On average, their walking speed improved by 28% within 2 weeks, a rate much faster than historical recovery norms. This effect wasn't attributed to better therapy compliance or younger age, but to the correction of a biochemical deficiency that was limiting tissue recovery and neuromuscular control. Skeptics may argue that 2 weeks is too short for muscle to grow meaningfully, and in terms of hypertrophy, that's partially true. You won't gain pounds of muscle in 14 days, but what the data shows is that strength, coordination, and tissue signaling improve rapidly when deficiency is corrected. These aren't imagined improvements, they're measurable in force plates, EMG readings, and grip dynamometers. They reflect changes at the biochemical level that translate into functional capacity. And functional capacity is the precursor to long-term hypertrophy and resilience. Another layer of this phenomenon involves inflammation and immune activation. Vitamin D is a powerful modulator of the immune system. It suppresses excessive cytokine production and enhances innate immune function. When vitamin D levels rise, systemic inflammation tends to decrease. That's why people often report feeling less soreness, more energy, and improved recovery shortly after beginning vitamin D supplementation. These are not just subjective reports, they align with biochemical shifts in muscle breakdown and regeneration signaling. It's also worth addressing the bioavailability and dosing angle. The studies showing results in 14 days typically use daily doses of 2,000 to 5,000 U of vitamin D3, depending on baseline deficiency. These amounts are safe, well within the tolerable upper intake levels, and effective at rapidly restoring serum concentrations. This is crucial because dosing needs to be enough to cross the biological threshold quickly. Too little, and the effect is delayed or blunted. But when the dose is appropriate, the system responds with a speed that defies traditional expectations of vitamin therapy. Across all this research, one theme emerges: the body is not passively deteriorating, it is constantly responding to inputs. Vitamin D, when present in the right amount, provides one of the most powerful and fast-acting signals to muscle tissue, the nervous system, and the immune network. The 14-day window is not a limit, it's the beginning of change. It marks the moment when deficiency ends and adaptation begins. Let me know when you're ready for the next keynote expansion on optimizing vitamin D. Requires testing and consistency.